My name is Abby and I'll be hosting the chat today. I'm the events coordinator here at MEC, and on behalf of the team, including the teams from Matt and Fran, thank you very much for attending. The way the Fireside chat will work is we'll have an interview for about half an hour, then we'll open up to the audience for questions, taking us through to the end of the session. So please feel free to send your questions in via the chat throughout the session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country where I'm broadcasting from today, Wurundjeri Wurrung people and the Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I also encourage you to pay respects to the traditional owners of the lands you're on this afternoon. So the Fireside Chat series is designed to help founders learn from people who have been there and done that. You'll hear the journey of a prominent entrepreneur in the startup ecosystem, how they did it and what worked for them. And we hope you'll be able to take away some actionable advice and strategies that may assist you in your own entrepreneurial journey. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Alison Hardacre. Alison is the co-founder and co-CEO of a global health software platform that makes healthcare efficient, effective, and accessible for practitioners, patients, and people everywhere. In just 8 years, she has taken it from an idea through to a global business with customers in 130 countries, with teams in Australia, Europe, and North America. So prior to founding Halaxy, Alison had held executive roles in banking and health insurance, and she has also served as a director of health, welfare, and disability organisations. Alison speaks 5 Asian languages and holds an MBA from Melbourne Business School and law and arts degrees from Monash University. Thanks so much for joining us, Alison.
Thanks for having me. We're excited to be here.
Great. So we will kick off with some questions. Could you please tell us about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I grew up in Melbourne and I've lived here most of my life, but I've also lived in Asia as well, primarily Thailand. And so I grew up in an area in Melbourne where if I'd stayed there, I'd probably have been one of the few to go to uni. And then I went to a school in the city that was selective, and then sort of encountered people that wanted to be lawyers. So, oh, maybe I should do that. And so then I went and studied law, and then at law school encountered people who wanted to be politicians. And then I thought, yeah, nah. So I did law at Monash, but the thing that I absolutely loved was learning languages. So if I weren't doing what I'm doing now, I would love to be setting up Google Translate or something like that, or doing a PhD in linguistics. Anyway, and so then I think lawyers often do law but don't really want to be lawyers, I think. And so I moved to consulting pretty quickly after my law degree, and then went and did an MBA. And after that, got a bit more organised about my career. And so then I led strategy and corporate planning at Medibank Private. So after my MBA, I wanted to work in either banking or health. And so it was a combination of the two. And then I moved to a line role, which meant that I had responsibility for a whole sort of business area within Medibank. And then moved again to ANZ and worked my way up the corporate ladder. Ticked off all the things you do. So ran strategy, marketing, sales, technology areas, operations, ran a project, which is where I met my business partner, and then got a role at another bank. It was my first executive role. And then came to the conclusion that corporate life was not for me, which to be honest, I kind of concluded about 1 month into being at ANZ, but it took 3 years for the big, beautiful idea to come. And I thought it was all about reading the markets pages in the Australian Financial Review and all of that. No, it's what you're passionate about. And so I'd done a lot of work in the community sector, and both from a treatment point of view in terms of working with people with disabilities or people with mental health issues, for example, but also a governance and policy point of view. And so then I really was interested in the healthcare sector because it's making a difference everywhere. It's something that matters to everybody. And so being able to combine my professional background with my understanding of healthcare, both from a sort of policy and a payments and treatment point of view, has been fantastic. I used to often be Ali outside of work and Alison at work, whereas now I'm one and the same person because my life is so much more connected, which is great.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned your different languages that you speak. I'm very interested to know, how did you come to speak 5 different Asian languages? It's very impressive.
Oh, I really, really like languages. One of my lockdown projects was to create a welcome embroidery thing that says hello in the different languages, in the different alphabets that I speak and read. We should all have lockdown projects. My lockdown projects have become less ambitious, and now it's just fix something or whatever, or learn to cook. And so at school I learned French and Indonesian, and then in my arts degree I did Indonesian and a bridging course to learn Malay, and I also did Thai and went and lived in Bangkok. And then from there, Thai is similar to Lao, and so I taught myself Lao and taught myself to read Lao as well. And then I picked up Cantonese along the way, but I can't read Chinese.
Wow, that really is incredible. And could you tell us a little bit about your own story and how you actually came to found Halaxy?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted something in either healthcare or education, and I wanted it to be online. And then I was at a friend's place in the country, and this is going back 10 years, and he was dialing up the internet. That's how bad the internet was in the country. And I realized that there was an opportunity for telehealth. So people could see practitioners online, because people in rural areas have a 4 years less life expectancy than people in urban areas, in part due to lack of access to healthcare services. And so that was the original idea of the business, and we set about building a platform so that practitioners and patients could meet and patients could be treated. But then it evolved into a whole platform for all of healthcare, no matter whether you're seeing somebody in person or online. And then we rebuilt the product and launched Halaxy, which is a healthcare platform, so Health Galaxy, to be able to provide that software to everybody internationally. And so currently only 0.5% of, up until before COVID, 0.5% of our appointments were online. That's obviously changed a little bit with the pandemic, but we sort of pioneer multi-mode practices, so practitioners can see a patient online or face-to-face. And so we run all their appointments, patient records, which is customized to 75 different professions, clinical billing, which is incredibly complex, and we customize that to the different health systems around the world, and financial reports. So our goal is to save practitioners a few minutes per appointment, and that adds up to an hour a day, so they can treat more patients. Because there's a very significant issue in healthcare, which is that practitioners don't need more patients, but patients need more doctors. And we can see that now, what's happening in mental health. It's very, very hard to get an appointment at the moment with a mental health practitioner because there's just so much need. And so our goal is to save that time to make healthcare better everywhere. And we do that now in 130 countries. And so we've learnt a lot along the way, and yeah, that's why I really like doing fireside chats like this, so I can share some of our learnings.
Wonderful. And so you've just mentioned that Halaxy does now have practitioners across 130 countries. Could you tell us a little bit about how you planned for growth and expansion in the global market?
Yeah, I think we built a product that could handle any health system. So part of that was looking at the difference between health systems and treatment is the same everywhere. If you get tonsillitis, or for that matter, COVID, you'll be treated in the same way here as you would be in the UK or South Africa, for example. But what is different is how it's all paid for. So who pays, how they pay, and how they bill. So it's not sexy, but that's ultimately what we solved. So people do whole degrees in clinical billing, and our software automates that. So understanding the difference between health systems and building a product that's global, but then targeting customers at a local level. So we now, if you sign up in the UK, you'll be thinking that the software was built in the UK because it is so customized to the UK market. And the same with Australia. And so we started growing our customer base, started off in Australia, but then pretty quickly got customers internationally. And so launched in 2013. By the end of 2013, we had 400 practitioners. By the end of 2014, we had 4,000. Now we're more than 60,000. And realistically, we've only done about 2% of what we want to do, which coincides with our market share, which is 2% of the world's digitized private practitioners. So we want 100% as soon as possible. So that's the goal. And it's all about making healthcare better.
Wow, that's really fantastic. So you've managed a healthcare software venture through the COVID-19 crisis. Could you tell us some of the impacts that the pandemic has had on Halaxy?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody will remember back to March 2020. At the start of the month, I was in Canada because we were about 2 weeks off launching our Canadian office. So we have an office here in Melbourne as well as Ireland, and then now Canada. But got back to Melbourne and everything was changed. You couldn't buy toilet paper anywhere. And so that was when I sort of thought things a little bit weird. And then within a week, it was very clear that this was not just something that was a small thing. It was going to be a global pandemic. And so we didn't have a history of working from home. So I had to move people to working from home. Every single metric that we ran the business by was changing. So key for us is appointments. And you think if there's a healthcare crisis, there'll be more appointments. But no, it was actually the opposite. People didn't want to see their practitioner because they might get COVID if they go to see a doctor. But also people didn't want to see a practitioner because, oh no, I've just hurt my arm. I'm not dying. I don't need to see a practitioner. And so that was a key metric for us, and it changed. And so for me, those last 2 weeks of March are just one of a bit of panic. Because everything was all up in the air and in a way that we had never experienced before. You couldn't predict anything. So we had to sort of sit it out for 2 weeks, which at the time felt like 2 years, and then sort of saw that, okay, now we understand what will happen. Appointments will generally migrate. Some will migrate to online, some will still be in person. Some professions won't be able to see patients, such as physical therapies, some surgeries, for example, but some will and will automatically move to online. So within a few months, online appointments became 14% of our overall appointment base. And then by about August last year, it dropped to 7%. And so we think that's where the market will be. It'll always have 7% of appointments online. However, having said that, we're speaking at the end of September, and with the lockdowns in Sydney and Melbourne, online appointments are 16%. So it was a real change in the business in terms of running it because everybody was working from home. We couldn't manage the metrics. But then what we saw, and this is really key, was the pandemic has digitized a lot of areas, and healthcare is one of the last industries to digitize. So it meant that we were getting a lot of people coming on board that hadn't necessarily been using software before, which increased our service needs, but it also increased our growth cycles. So we've doubled in the last year and a half, and we're now profitable, which wasn't necessarily the plan for now. And then I think also the opportunity for us is that last barrier to growth, which is practitioners being a bit reticent to use software has changed significantly. So it's on the whole been good from a business point of view. From a team point of view, obviously it's been quite stressful. And who would have thought we'd all be working from home even in end of September?
Yeah, it's definitely crazy times.
Yeah.
So I guess following on from that, so as a leader, how did you manage change when the pandemic did hit, like trying to get it right and fast as well? Like, did you find that practitioners were hesitant to move online? How did you overcome any of these challenges?
Yeah, so those last 2 weeks of March, for me, it was all about moving the team to working from home. But at the same time, our customer calls doubled. And it was because practitioners realized they needed to move to software. And in particular, then practitioners who were already using us realized they needed to move to online appointments sometimes. So that was a change for absolutely everybody. And then one of our products processes payments. So it functions like Uber. So the patient's appointment details are entered onto the system just once. And then everything's processed from there. So nobody's actually having to touch the payment side of things, which saves a lot of administration, but also means that a practitioner and patient can focus on the clinical relationship. And so people were suddenly using all these different products. So there was just so much change. I think for me, though, that the difficulty was how do you lead in a circumstance where everything is changing? And I didn't know what I was doing back then. I sort of just went with it, and I realized, the team knows me quite well, and we're a global team, but we're very close. So being open and honest about that. And then making decisions and communicating them. Okay, we're working from home. There's stuff on our Slack channel that's me talking about working from home for just a couple of weeks back in March last year. So that was a little bit wrong, but giving people that certainty of, okay, this is what we'll be doing, and supporting people. Also, because people were remote, so the tech team, for example, didn't see that the service team was handling double the customer queries. And so sharing those. So I think it's made us much more of a transparent organization. Talking through my business with some of my friends that run different types of businesses, so not necessarily a high growth venture. They might have a sort of all hands meeting maybe once a month, if that. We have that every day. And we share revenue growth, we share customer numbers growth, we share all of that. And so I think it's kind of going with the flow. And for me, what the last year and a half has meant is it's probably improved my confidence more, in that I had no idea where things would go, but I just worked it out. And so something might happen tomorrow that's the same feeling. And so it's not that I'll suddenly know how to work it out, but I have the confidence of knowing that I've done that before, dealt with an unexpected situation.
Sure, yeah. So we've spoken about how COVID has affected your business. What ways have you seen that COVID has affected the wider health system long term?
Yeah, I think telehealth is here to stay. But it's not that everything is moving online. I think it'll only be 7% of the business, of the appointments. I think over the next 5 years, there's going to be so much need for mental health services. So we're quite big in mental health. A third of our customer base is in mental health. And waiting times between making the appointment and having the appointment has doubled with the pandemic. So that's going to continue for quite a while, I think. It's not just the pandemic, but the lockdowns. Also, I think there's an increasing globalization of healthcare, and patients wanting more input into their healthcare. So we have a personal health record where people can track their own healthcare. We're seeing a lot more use of that. And it's a nascent area of healthcare, but it will really grow. And I think the other thing is people really understand that the healthcare system, we always say in Australia, we have one of the best in the world. Well, it's one of the best in the world because it's held together by the goodness of people's hearts. I think there's a real opportunity for a lot of process improvement across a range of different areas.
Great. You did touch on this before, so that the whole think globally, act locally. Many startups do go global, but have to be localized at the same time to resonate with their customers. How did Halaxy go about that?
Yeah, so we knew that we needed to build the software to be global at first. And so, but we also didn't have any money to go around to different countries and get people to test the product. So what we saw was where we were at the time, the office was right next to the sort of backpacker area of Melbourne. And we realized a lot of backpackers were actually from a healthcare background. So we sat down with them, and for the cost of a beer, which my business partner drank, I'm not a beer person, more of a chocolate girl. And for the cost of a beer, they would then test the product, and then we could perfect the product without actually needing practitioners in those markets to be using it day to day. And so that was really critical. We'd also worked out early on with our first business that your traditional methods of selling a product, such as making appointments and seeing practitioners and showing them the software, advertising, conferences, that sort of thing, were incredibly expensive, but didn't necessarily get you sales. And so we built an email marketing system that could be very customized and targeted to any practitioner of any profession in the world. So through email marketing, we were able to grow very, very quickly. And that was quite localized. And then we can create web page front pages that are customized to each health system, etc. And so more and more, we're doing more and more of those customizations, researching the different health systems, building things into different languages, building out our training materials, etc. So we're at that cusp of doing it again. So not just having a product that's global and having marketing that's global, having the wider offering to be global.
Great. You've mentioned before that achieving a strong team culture is important to you. Halaxy has a very impressive employee net promoter score of 93. What do you attribute this to?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened over the last 18 months is we really focused on business fundamentals. So getting our growth happening, getting our cost of acquisition, keeping it as low as it has been, but really striving to have the right funnel and just providing service in an efficient and effective way, etc. But the thing that I'm proudest of is having a team that is so engaged. So at first I wanted to make healthcare better, and that's why I built Halaxy. Then over time it became about building a business that makes healthcare better. And then it became about building a business that makes healthcare better and shows how to build one with a happy team. And so pre-pandemic, our net promoter score for employees was around 63, which is still very strong. And so the maximum you can get on a net promoter score is 100. The minimum you can get is minus 100. So 63 is pretty good. But getting to 93 in November last year was amazing. And so I think when we interview people often ask, how would you describe your culture? And one time I remember interviewing with somebody on another team member, and he said to that question, well, there's a lot of focus on food, which is of course very true. But the serious answer is culture is who you're going to work with and what they're like. So it's getting your recruitment processes right. So making sure everybody can handle the product, so the complexity, understands and lives by pace, because it's all about growing and learning, and then is easy to work with and reliable. And so building a culture around that has been important, and also supporting everybody, because everyone matters in the whole team. And so building a global team has been critical. So if you go to our Irish office, it's got the same culture as in Australia. They make the same jokes, apparently. Maybe they make them better than I do, but they make the same jokes. And it's the same with our Canadian team as well. And so it's really about building a connection across everybody and making sure that everyone knows that we care. I think it's in that respect, caring, respect, everything like that your parents taught you growing up is what matters.
Right. And then just, I guess, also following on from that, how do you keep morale high and the team happy when you're busy trying to remotely upskill, handle double the amount of customer service requests and roll out new features?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. I think we had, because we're going so well, people see that and they want to be a part of that journey. I think the remoteness of having teams across the world, before COVID, we had a plan that everybody would get to travel all over the world. And so get to spend 2 weeks in the Irish office, for example, and then you ultimately getting a free trip to Europe. So 2 weeks in Ireland, and then you get to travel. And so by building those personal connections in the team, that's really what matters. And that's obviously not been something that we've been able to do in the last little while. But next week, one of our team in Canada is going to be in the Cork office in Ireland for a week. So Zoom is fine, but personal connections are what matters. So having people come out and travel across the world is really important. It also means that the founders aren't everything to the team. It means everyone's personally connecting. We call them brinners. So you've heard of brunch, which is breakfast and lunch. A brinner is breakfast and dinner, because the time zones between Australia and Ireland mean that we can only have brinners. We can't have brunches. So it's so if it's 5 p.m. in Melbourne, it's currently 8 a.m. in Ireland. And so they're having breakfast while we're having dinner. And so it's keeping things fun, but keeping things serious, because we have a serious mission.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, being from the UK. I have to talk to my family when it's the morning over there and evening here. So yeah, you have to improvise, don't you?
Exactly. And I've never been so good on understanding time and time zones and that sort of thing. And the next month is difficult because we move forward 1 hour, but they don't. And then 2 weeks later, Canada moves somehow. And then 2 weeks after that, Ireland moves. So it's always up in the air in October.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll just ask maybe one more question before we move over to the audience Q&A. So if you don't mind sharing, your core software system is free to use. Would you be able to tell us about your income model?
Sure. So we'd had a previous product, which was SaaS-based as well, and it was just in Australia and just small in its focus, and it was $100 per month. And we quickly realized that practitioners have very little willingness to pay for software. So they might have a lot of capacity to pay. Some of them do earn quite a lot of money, particularly surgeons, but they don't have a willingness to pay. And so that's partly because a lot of software hasn't necessarily benefited them. So there's a cynicism. Also, governments have paid practitioners to use software in the past, and they are providing an essential community service. So there's a real reticence to pay for software. So we thought, well, if we build product that's free, if they have no willingness to pay for software, well, what we found was they're willing to pay to be paid. So payments is a real headache for them, both in terms of managing the payment straight after you've treated somebody. No matter the size of the practice, it just adds a complexity and a load to the practice, including to reception staff. So we first saw that and we realized, okay, payments is something that my business partner is a payments expert. And so we make money from payments. It's about half of our revenue. So we manage the patient appointment fee. People can pay by cash or EFTPOS, or they can pay using our payment system. And so that grows pretty rapidly. So we're currently doing about $250 million in payments every year. Just managing that, which is great, and looking to provide that service globally as well. We also integrate with various funding bodies. So for us, how we make money that enables us to grow, and we now make more money from our customer base than we would if we had a subscription software. So the goal is to make a small amount of money from a lot of people rather than the traditional model, which is a lot of money from a few.
Oh, thank you very much for that. So about halfway through the session, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Abby, and she'll read out some of the questions from the chat. So yeah, another Abby to confuse everybody.
Hi everyone, how are we all doing? Thank you, Alison and Abby. That was a Really, really great chat there. Keep everyone just keep sending your questions through to the chat. That would be really great. We'll try to get to as many people as possible. What have we got here? So we've got one from Mikhail Pasternak there. So we've got, thanks Alison, a very inspiring story. Your background is law and corporate, but the company is in the tech space. How did you build these capabilities? Did you have co-founders, or did you rely on employing people with relevant skills? Would love to hear more about how you managed to achieve so much in such a different field.
Sure. So I think I had quite a lot of understanding of technology, but also of healthcare in particular. My business partner is a payments expert, and operations and technology is his game, basically. So he looks after the technology side of the business. And then we have a team of people under him, team of customer service people, etc. So over time, we've recruited people as we've grown. And so we're constantly recruiting. Recruiting during lockdown and onboarding people during lockdown is always hard. But as we emerge from lockdown, that will change.
Absolutely. I've got another one here from Michelle. Have you cracked into the public hospital segment, which can be more behind on digital health solutions? Has the private sector been faster to adapt? And what are the biggest barriers to implementation of digital health solutions in healthcare, particularly in the public sector?
Sure. So we focused on private practice. So 90% of private practice are sole or small operators, so below 10 practitioners. And then the rest are in a conglomerate kind of listed environment. So by focusing on the long tail, we were able to grow very, very quickly because we provided a product that did everything that they needed, adds new features every couple of days, and provided it with the core software being free. And so that was our first focus. In time, we might move into the hospital environment, and that may include public hospitals, of course. We do have some not-for-profits, that sort of thing, using the product as well. And so the biggest barrier has been, well, twofold. One, practitioners' reticence to use software, though that's removed. Also, I think our software is designed to be very configurable and customizable to however a practice is set up. And that would include however a hospital is set up, whereas that's not traditionally been the case. So there's traditionally been quite a massive implementation process before software is launched, whereas our software is designed to be very easily usable and easily understood in a training environment. And so that's been critical. And as we move to hospitals, more and more over time, we'll hopefully keep that ethos. But if I were to come back in 5 years, I'll have a lot of war stories about that.
Absolutely, 100%. I've got one here from Paul who said, hi Alison, did you put Halaxy through an incubator? Did you access VC funding? Any thoughts about what stage a startup should be at before approaching VCs?
Sure. So we self-funded at first, and then we had angel investors, and then a family office. So family offices often will have similar levels of funding to a VC. We're about to do another raise, and that may include private equity or VCs. I think the key thing is to get as far as possible without getting outside funding, because that way you can really achieve a lot more of your dream when you do have that funding. That's reflective of my journey. Having said that, if we were able to have raised more money earlier, it would have made the journey a lot easier. Yeah. I think that healthcare, going back years, healthcare wasn't necessarily a sector that was being targeted by investors, but that's changed. I think also there was originally a focus on MVPs, so only playing in a niche area, whereas we're wanting to make healthcare better everywhere, so it's not very niche. And I think sometimes there have been difficulties for women-led businesses in raising capital, but that's all improving and changing, which is a good thing. We were kind of before incubators came to be a real thing. And so we didn't do one. I have done an accelerator program, which is Springboard. This is going back a few years, and it's completely customized to your needs rather than putting you through a specific process. So I found that quite helpful. But as we're quite a lot bigger now, and I find a lot of my learnings come from other founders. So being a part of Startup Fix Growth Club, which is for scale-up businesses, and I'm also part of YPO, which is a network of business leaders around the world.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got another one here from Lyra. Hi Alison, how did you develop your scaling strategy to capture the local market and keep ahead of the competition?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, we tried everything with the first business, and it was quite expensive, but because our product was global and free, we needed a globally scalable sales model that was also very, very effective. So at first, email marketing was everything. And we found, because we had the right product, the right service, and the right offering, email marketing worked quite well. And it was quite cheap. So for a time, our cost of acquisition was below $1, whereas many of our competitors' cost of acquisition was around $250. So I remember pitching an investor who was based out of Hong Kong, and I'd done the pitch pack, etc. And at the time, our cost of acquisition was 88 cents, and 88 is a lucky number in Chinese. Anyway, and so he was sitting there talking to his offsider in Cantonese about the product, not knowing that I was understanding. And he would say to his offsider, "Oh, I wish you'd talk about her international strategy." So then I'd pull out that slide and talk about that. But then when we got to the cost of acquisition slide, I went into Cantonese and said that, and he was just shocked. But he was sort of also a bit embarrassed. He said, "Did you understand everything I've been saying?" I'm like, "Mm-hmm." So it's really important to have a very low cost of acquisition, at least at first. And then the emails were written in a way that keeps people reading. So you need the right subject, and you need the right offering, and the right price. So we were able to do that very quickly. And then now 80% of our customers come through word of mouth.
Fantastic, awesome. Kerry has one here that says, do you partner with people who develop specific healthcare technologies?
We do have some products that integrate into our product. And some of those are healthcare focused, such as secure messaging, for example, and some are more broader, such as Xero.
Perfect. Here, William has one. How do you manage the numerous different healthcare systems across many different countries? Is there a team assigned to each country, or is it all aggregated?
It's all aggregated. We've only got a team of 30 people, so we need to be able to do things very efficiently. And so the product is customizable to each health system, but people can sign up and use it and set it up for their own needs. But if we set it up for that health system, we'll get a higher use rate. So it'll be easier for people to onboard. So we do research into the different health systems, add the right funding bodies and fees, etc. And so then now if somebody signs up in a different country that's already had that experience, it'll look like it's specifically from that country. And so it's important to think through how you're going to get that scale really quickly, and how you're going to get that learning. As we're growing now, and part of the capital raise that we're doing is thinking through that very question. We don't ever think we'll have teams teams in each country, but we may have somebody who's focused on a particular region.
Perfect, thank you. I've got a couple that have just been direct messaged to me here as well. So can you talk us through how you established your overseas offices? Was it nerve-wracking relying on someone else to manage an office on the other side of the world?
Yes, this is my baby, and yes. I'm a control freak, and it's very hard. No, that's not true. Everything is about trust. And so when you're setting up an overseas office, there's various ways to do it. One is to hire an outsourced agency that's over in the other country. Another is to just hire people, have them work remotely, etc. But we wanted to have that same culture. So somebody who'd worked in the team for a year went across and set up Ireland. And that's how we get the same culture and processes and the connections. We had planned on doing the same in Canada, and we were 2 weeks off the person moving to Canada, but then COVID hit. And so we held back on launching our Canadian office for about 6 months. And in the end, hired the candidate that we really, really wanted. We hired, and he worked remotely, which I think is very hard, but he's done a very good job. We were beneficiaries of the fact that Canada has some crossover, because we're in the West Coast in Vancouver, has some crossover in terms of time zones with Melbourne. And so therefore he's kind of got that feeling as well. So this time last week was when Melbourne had the earthquake, and there was a recording of we record all of our team meetings. So there was a customer service team meeting when the earthquake happened. And so Fernando has known the whole team for, a year since he's joined. But I was watching the video, and we had to terminate the service team meeting after about a minute of the earthquake. But you could see, I was watching the video, and you could see him going, oh, wow. And thinking, like seeing everyone's cameras moving and knowing that we all lived in different areas and not knowing what was happening and thinking the worst. And it just shows, it's very hard to work remotely, but it shows that it built a connection across the whole team. I think it's very good that he'll be going to the Cork office next week. So, aside from me, I'm the only one that he's met. So it'll be good for him to connect with people. Because of coronavirus, we were not able to do our usual method, which is to send somebody across to that market. It has worked out, but I think it just would have been a better experience for everybody if he'd been able to work closely with somebody like that.
Absolutely. Kerry has just added here, her question before was more around therapeutic technology. So are you open to partnerships that support your customer base through additional plug-in technologies?
Yes, so we have some clinical technologies that integrate. We integrate with a product called Validic, which it's hard to explain, but it allows us to integrate things like blood pressure monitors, medical devices, for example. And so then they can integrate, and it can be seen, the results can be tracked in our personal health record, and then practitioners can also remotely monitor patients where possible. So we have a range of clinical technologies as well that we also have integration partnerships with.
Fantastic, awesome. I have another one here. Can you just talk us through how you and your co-founder clicked? How did you know he'd be the right person to start Halaxy with? Yeah, they do say a co-founder relationship is like a marriage. So can you give us a bit more background on that?
I think a lot of male-female co-founders are actually together. So we're not together, but it's more like a family. So Lockie and I had worked together at ANZ. So we knew each other for a year. And when I first set up the first business, I knew what my skills were, but I also knew that I needed somebody who could who's focused on operations and could do a lot of things. And so thinking through my options, I met a few people and then knew Lockie was the right person. So he had the skills, but it was also about trust. And so that's really evolved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Alison, how do you train your customers in the use of your technology? And how long does it typically take for customers to become proficient in the use of your technology?
So we have customer service team that answers queries, etc., but we expect practitioners to get themselves up and running themselves. And so videos are fantastic for that, but you can't do that unless your product is very easy to use. So our product is very complex on the back end, but very easy for people to use at the same time. And so then people can get up and running within a few minutes. But to get fully proficient, which is, handling all sorts of different funding bodies, all sorts of different patient types, etc., it may take more than a few minutes. I think if people focused on it, they could spend 15 to 20 minutes and get up to speed. But the reality is we're also launching new features every couple of days, which we share with practitioners through our comms systems. But it's always going to be learning.
Absolutely, yeah. I have another one here. As an entrepreneur, do you have any advice for our teams on the call going through our MAP and TRAM programs? For example, any tips on decision making or ways to ramp up ambition?
Yeah, I think take as big a goal as possible. I slightly criticized the whole MVP idea before. I think in healthcare, you can't readily do an MVP because if something breaks, well, someone might die. And so you need to have minimum value. The standard is much higher, I think, when you're in healthcare. Having said that, what did I say? Can you just repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So as an entrepreneur, do you have any advice for our teams on the call going through the MAP and TRAM programs, i.e. any tips on decision making or just ways to ramp up ambition?
Yeah, so I think if we had have been niche, we always would have been niche. The advice to start off niche and expand is, I don't think it's a very good one because you'll always be niche. So we had some experience with the first business, and then with the second business, we thought we want to make healthcare better everywhere. And it was very hard because we'd say that and we'd be so energized by it. And then people would just criticize. Oh, no, that's too big. Or, oh, I had that idea before, but didn't do it. Well, no, you didn't do it. So go away. Sort of thing. And so, you've really just got to stick to your guns and make your ambition as big as possible. There should be nothing holding you back. Australia is sometimes quite a naysayer culture. Sometimes doesn't have to be, but it is. And I think over time, just ignore that. I remember watching a video of Kathy Freeman talking, and she was saying the same thing, which is sometimes people will hold you back and you've just got to let them go. And so I found that too, that sometimes people, you want advice, but you want the advice to come from the right place and the right people. And so if people are kind of not wanting you to succeed or whatever, or fearful of you succeeding, then you may need to think through your friendship with them.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a couple more here. Once we're eventually back in the office, do you have any plans on how you'll help to bring the team back together and help them reset?
Yeah, so we didn't have a culture of working from home before. We had a lot of flexibility, but not working from home. And then we were forced into it. And then we found there are some benefits to it and some negatives. So we've put in place a hybrid model. So people working in the office 3 days a week and working from home on Mondays and Fridays. And so we had a trial of that the first half of the year when Melbourne was back in the office, which was good. I think when we're back in the office, hopefully in a month or two, I'd like to focus those 3 days in the office on doing work, but also coordination, so that on those 2 days when people are working from home, there is enough focus, so people can focus on working on the right things at the right time in the right way. Yeah. So it's an opportunity to kind of have a second go at it, I think. Also, we all have been through something really significant. So acknowledging that in some way, I think, is really important, and bringing the team together in person, but also acknowledging the stress.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the thing you miss the least about corporate life?
I don't think I was very good at it. I didn't like I often felt my job was to keep my job. It wasn't really doing and making things better. So I enjoy most making things better. I did not enjoy the politics at all. And I didn't enjoy the feeling of, even if I had done a really good job, the political sands may shift and then I didn't have the security. So I have more security in this job than I would in the corporate world. In the corporate world, you're just a permanent contractor. Can you tell I'm not a huge fan of the corporate world?
Not at all, no.
No, I think it does work for some people, but I was not one of those people.
Absolutely. I might just ask one more to wrap up, or before we wrap up, sorry. We've got Susan here from Gather Group. How did you access family foundations?
Yeah, so the family offices are interesting. I think you kind of approach them in the same way you would approach any other investor. So it's not a philanthropy kind of field, it's they're investing the family money in your business. But oftentimes they'll be making a choice clearly on the returns, etc., but also on their passion for what you're building. And so it's the same as with any other investment approach. And MAP is a fantastic way of doing that. Being a part of these networks really helps you make those connections.
Fantastic. I think we've still got time for a couple of more here. Do you see any opportunities for improved healthcare through telehealth?
I think so. I think I've had myself a couple of telehealth appointments. I think there's a need for it, but I think it is still secondary. When something's complex, you do need to speak in person, I think. But I see the opportunities as being not just, it's the pandemic, telehealth is our only opportunity. I see the opportunities being much broader than that in the long term. Also, with improved hardware and technologies, it will really feel like being in person. And so therefore the areas and the types of appointments that can be online will change and improve, which is a good thing.
What is the biggest challenge you've encountered so far in growing Halaxy, and how did you overcome that?
I don't know. I think those challenges change all the time. If you'd asked me 6 years ago, it would have been funding. Funding is still always a challenge, but back then it would have been funding for mere survival, whereas now the frustration is, okay, I need more funding to grow and have the impact. Sorry. Excuse me. I always do 3 sneezes. It's apparently and so funding is always a challenge. I think as you grow, you become more and more reliant on other people. So making sure you have the right people in the right team. The frustration I've felt over the last 18 months has been, people have done their best and done a really good job, but helping bring people together to do things, to work and work on the right things in the right way when you're a very lean team is a challenge. And so being back in the office will help that.
Absolutely. How did you go about creating a product that's so easy for practitioners to use?
Yeah, I didn't quite realize it was a thing to create a product that wasn't easy to use. And so it just became about, I think, something that a lot of really good entrepreneurs have is empathy. So the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And if you've had a similar experience to them, even better. But if you've had no experience, so, I'm white, you may have noticed. I've not really had that much experience of racism, except when I've lived in Asia. But having the empathy for an experience that is not your own, I think is really important. And that's the same, understanding customers. I'm not out there in practices all day, every day. So having an empathy for that and having an empathy for team members. And so an empathy will guide you to create a product that is easy to use. It's streamlined. It's, making the best possible optimizations for customers. So it's actually quite an emotional process.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got time for just one more question. So we're going through a period where we've got plenty of additional challenges. How do you go about identifying and mitigating challenges you expect or can see developing?
There was a question earlier, which was, do you have any advice about decision making, which is kind of the same thing. So when you've got a lot of competing things going on, your question should always be, what's the best how do I get more customers using this and benefiting from this? And so therefore, if you've got a people problem, it's an assessment based on how do I get more use by more customers who benefit. So that may be supporting somebody who's having some mental health issues, for example, taking some time off so that they can come back bigger and better. That impacts your financial decisions, that impacts everything. So that to me is the key decision, the key question every day. How do we get more people using a product all the time? Once you've gone beyond idea stage, that's always your question. So it allows you to choose between that opportunity and that opportunity. Sometimes it won't be clear. And if it isn't clear, go with one, hopefully in a way that doesn't cut off your opportunity to go with the other one. But that's what I'd say. So that answers the question earlier, but it also answers this question too. So it always comes back to, how do I get more people to benefit from my product?
Perfect. We've got one more here just from Synth, which I think is actually a lovely question to finish up on before I hand back to Abby. Hi, Alison, your journey is inspiring. What advice would you give to someone who wants to take the first step into the entrepreneurial landscape?
Just do it. Absolutely. Trial everything, trial a lot, learn a lot, do it, and focus on the learning at first, and then focus on the outcomes you want to achieve. But knowing that you'll always be learning. And learning comes partly from making mistakes, partly from challenges, and partly from having curiosity. So all of those, especially the curiosity point, is what will enable you to learn and to grow, and hopefully to grow your product and business.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much. Abby, I'll pass back to you.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, everyone, and especially for your input with the questions. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Alison. We have absolutely loved having you and hearing your wonderful journey. To everyone on the call, if you would like to attend our next Fireside chat with Dr. Adam Bumpus, that is going to take place on Wednesday, the 20th of October. We'll send through the details on how to register for that later, along with a link to the recording of today's session. We've got lots of things happening in the next few months, so just make sure you're subscribed to our Matt and Tram newsletters to keep up to date. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Alison, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.